Hello, thank you for tuning in to ACTV Channel 20 today. My name is Jenny Davidson. I'm the CEO of Stand Up Placer, where we serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So we've been in existence for about 40 years, serving domestic violence and sexual assault victims, and over the last couple of years, we've added human trafficking victims into our service population. We have a safe house in an undisclosed location with 55 beds and a crisis line where if you ever feel like you're in danger or you just want more information, maybe even for a friend, you can call our crisis line anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you can reach that at 1-800-575-5352. We also have a service office in Roseville and a service office in Auburn, where if you just need to be able to walk in and get assistance, those are fantastic places for you to do that. And we have transitional housing where folks can live for 12 to 24 months while we pay their rent and do weekly home visits and just check in on them, help them with financial coaching and support groups and different educational opportunities. And we have those same support groups for folks out in our service offices as well. So if any of those things seem like something maybe you would want more information about after hearing us talking today, please don't hesitate to call our crisis line. Again, that's 1-800-575-5352. And today I'm going to be talking here with two of our fantastic frontline workers. I have Kyle and Taylor with me, who both are out there every day doing this work, but they both also do a lot of outreach to our community to make sure and get the education out there. So for one, domestic violence, that's let's get on maybe some common language so that we're all talking about the same things. When we talk about domestic violence, people think of hitting and kicking, and yeah, that's absolutely part of it, but it's really any intimate partner relationship where one person is doing something to exert power and control over another person. That could be emotional, psychological, things with the children. There are a lot of different ways. Even pets. We have found a really major problem in our community with people threatening to hurt a pet if the other person were to leave. And so we're doing a lot around trying to make our safe house pet friendly and to have options for those folks who may not want to leave an abuser because they're afraid of what might happen to their pets if they go. And then we have sexual assault. So a lot of times people think of that as very specifically rape, but that's really just one component of a lot of wide range of things that might be happening for somebody. Any kind of in non-consensual sexual touch would be sexual assault. And so if that has happened to you, please don't hesitate to call our 800 number, 1-800-575-5352, and we can try to get you the resources that you might need. And then the third one is human trafficking. With human trafficking, that's anytime sex is exchanged for something of value. It could be money, but it could be drugs, could be a place to sleep that night. There are a lot of different things that people use. And then there's an element of force, fraud, or coercion, where maybe that person doesn't want to really be in the sexual relationship, but they're either tricked into it or they don't think that they have a way out. A really big thing we're seeing lately too is this sugar daddies, where people are really feeling pressured into sort of long-term sexual relationships with somebody who, if they feel like they can't leave because there's been some threat of outing the situation or something. So there's a lot of different levels of different kinds of abuse, and obviously I only named a few. There's so many more. And if you feel like you need help with any of those things, please do call our 800 number, again, 800-575-5352. But today we are talking about a very specific population and how those things may intersect with this population. And that population is the LGBTQ community. And so for those who may not know, can one of you please let me know I know that there's the alphabet soup, I think you called it, that acronym, it gets longer and longer. What are all of the letters and what do they mean, and how might those impact a person in the community?
So at this time, the acronym is up to LGBTQIP2SAA. So that's going to stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, pansexual, two-spirit, asexual, and aromantic.
So that's a lot of letters, and I would love for you guys to define, elaborate a little bit more.
So the L stands for lesbian, and that is anyone who identifies as a female and who is interested in either sexual or romantic relationship with another female.
The G is going to stand for gay, so that can be used both as an umbrella term to encompass sort of the whole community, and then it can also specifically refer to people who identify as a man and are attracted to other men.
And then we move on to the B, which is bisexual, and that is an individual who identifies as any type of gender or a non-conforming gender, and they are romantically and or sexually attracted to two different genders. And this is normally comes out to be the main dichotomy of male and female.
The T, transgender. So transgender is anybody who is transitioning from one gender to another, and it can also encompass anybody who identifies as a gender outside of our gender binary. So maybe somebody that identifies as genderqueer, agender, gender nonconforming.
And then we have our two Qs. We have queer and questioning. So questioning is when someone's in that kind of limbo phase of, do I like girls? Do I like boys? Do I like people who are non-conforming? How do I identify myself? So that's this whole process when we first begin asking ourselves these questions about gender identity, gender expression, and biological sex, and how we feel about those.
So queer is another umbrella term. So basically, queer has evolved from the meaning of abnormal or different to basically being somebody who identifies as either not heterosexual or not cisgendered. Like I said, it's sort of an umbrella. A lot of people who may identify also as gay, bisexual, or lesbian would rather identify with queer because it's an identity that moves away from a lot of the sort of negativities in the community like ableism, sexism, body shaming, racism. So it's just supposed to be a little more radical and encompass more people. And then we have the I for intersex. So intersex would be anybody that falls out of the dichotomy of the male-female sex. So that's talking biological sex and not gender. So basically it's anybody whose external genitalia, their hormones, chromosomes, or secondary sex characteristics do not line up with the typical XX and XY sexes.
And then we also have the P, which stands for pansexual. And pansexual are folks who can identify as any gender again, and they are either sexually or romantically attracted to any individual. And it has nothing to do with their own sex or their partner's gender identity or expression. So they are all inclusive and encompassing.
So then after P, we have the 2S, which stands for two-spirit. So over history, a lot of different Native American tribes have had third genders. So they all came together at this sort of conference in 1990 to find a more encompassing term. So two-spirit was chosen, and basically it just represents somebody who has both a masculine and feminine spirit within one body. And in a lot of tribes, they're seen as spiritual leaders.
And then we have the two A's, A for aromantic and then A for asexual. So asexuals are those who do not get any gratification out of sexual intimacy, and then aromantics do not get any gratification out of a romantic relationship.
Thank you. That's really helpful. There's a lot of different things that maybe people aren't quite sure what they mean, and maybe they assume it means this, but thank you for giving us a lot more information. But it does also bring up the question, like, what is the difference with like gender identity or gender expression, biological sex, and the different intersections of all of those things? What's the difference there with like sexual versus romantic attraction?
So biological sex is what is determined when you are born, or a lot of times now through an ultrasound, but it's basically you have that moment when you make it into the world, the doctor holds you up in the little Lion King moment and says it's a boy or it's a girl. And usually that's just sort of determining gender based off of biological sex. That's purely determined by the external genitalia that they see, and even that may be false because somebody could have different chromosomes than the biological sex that they're seeing represented only by external genitalia. And then we get into gender identity, which is somebody's internal sense of self as a gendered being, so how one identifies. For many people, they identify as that gender that was assigned to them when they were born. And then from gender identity, you get into gender expression. So gender expression is how one represents to the world. So it could be hair, makeup, clothing, basically anything to present a gender. So basically, you open up the closet in the morning, you pick clothes, you say, I'm going to wear this and this because it represents me as a man. And a lot of times that can not match up to gender identity for a variety of reasons.
Right, so it's not mutually exclusive. So if I perceive myself and my gender identity as female, one day I might wake up, I might open my closet and say, I want to dress a little androgynous today. So I might not pick my pink frilly dress. Or I might wake up and I might want to gender express as more masculine. So I might wear boys' or men's clothing, just based on how I'm feeling for that day. And it can also change within the day. So maybe I go to work and I dress in typical feminine clothing, but then when I come home, I might feel more comfortable in more androgynous clothing. And then from there, we move on to sexual and romantic attraction. So sexual attraction is pretty much who we want to go to bed with and participate in those types of activities with. And then a romantic attraction is who we want to date, who we want to connect with on other levels other than pure physical, pure sexual.
So I know also there are new acronyms coming out just today with folks who are in the community saying like that. We realize that's a lot of alphabet letters for everybody to really remember in order to interact with us. And so they're coming up with some shorter but really more inclusive acronyms. Can you maybe mention what some of those might be?
Yeah, so GSM and GSD are both acronyms that have taken off sort of in different countries and in different communities. So those just stand for gender and sexual diversity and gender and sexual minorities. But one that we're really seeing a rise in right now is going to be QT, which stands for queer and transgender, with transgender sort of representing all the different genders under the umbrella, and then queer representing all the different sexual orientations.
Okay. Awesome. Let's use that. Let's try and use that when we can, and bring it out. We'll make it happen today. So with that in mind, what are some of the challenges that the QT population might face with domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking? How might that be different?
So one of the biggest challenges that the QT community faces is just sort of a lack of knowledge about it happening in the community, and sort of the community not really being able to address that kind of violence. So a lot of times people just aren't reporting that it's happening. So a lot of times the statistics aren't even reflecting that DV, SA, HT is occurring in the community. And there's actually a wide variety of reasons why people don't report it.
Right. So as Kyle was saying, a lot of under-reporting because it's hard enough for an individual to come forward and say, hey, there's violence occurring in my relationship, or I've just been sexually assaulted, or coming to the conclusion of, oh my gosh, I've been trafficked. But adding the layer of their other vulnerability of their sexual orientation or their gender identity is all the more frightening for them, because now they have to re-out themselves to a stranger.
And so what are some of the reasons that might be especially difficult to report if you're in the QT community experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking? What some of the reasons that it's hard to report?
So like I'd mentioned, it's sort of just that fear of coming out with it in the first place, and the fear of coming out with it and being believed is prominent with all survivors, but when you're adding that layer of sexual orientation or gender identity, just sort of increases it. So beyond that, there's just the fear of negatively portraying the QT relationships. Same-sex marriage is still so new that a lot of the community is afraid that it's going to get taken away from us. So we don't really want to air out that dirty laundry and show that there's something going on in our relationships.
Mm.
And have that privilege taken away.
Right.
After it was just granted.
Right.
And then also within the domestic violence community, if someone calls or if law enforcement gets dispatched and they see two women fighting, we hear this whole, oh, it's just a cat fight, like, let the girls do what they need to do. Or if it's two men, it's like, well, boys will be boys, it's an even matchup, they're about the same height, relatively same weight, and they can, take care of what they need to take care of like men. However, what often gets forgotten about, even in heterosexual, romantic, or sexual relationships, is the fact that it's all about power and control. When we look at domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, at the end of the day, it's about power and control and being able to assume power and control over another individual and taking advantage of them based on their vulnerabilities.
And then like Taylor was saying with the whole boys will be boys or it's just a cat fight situation, that's actually reflected in law enforcement and court systems, because a lot of times law enforcement's unable to conduct an accurate dominant aggressor analysis, so they're not really able to identify who's the abuser and who's the victim in the situation, because typically they just view it through that gendered lens. And then for that reason, there's higher likelihoods of dual or no arrest in those situations. And then that gets reflected in the court systems with dual or no restraining orders awarded. So that can become problematic when you get into certain family codes, which presume if you have a restraining order against you, that you want to have custody of your children. So if both parties get those dual restraining orders, it sort of leaves a question in who's going to have custody of the children.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying across the board. That custody issue is a reason that a lot of people stay in violent situations longer, no matter what, but especially, I would think, in that specific population. Are there other things that you know of that are reasons why people have a hard time coming forward?
Definitely. So internalized self-blame is definitely one of those things. So a lot of survivors already sort of blame themselves for the situation they're in, but if somebody isn't necessarily to terms with their gender identity or their sexual orientation, it may add on to that. So it turns into this whole situation of, if I wasn't gay, if I wasn't trans, I wouldn't have been in this situation, I wouldn't have been in this relationship, it's my fault.
And another thing that occurs alongside that is, say they come out to family members or their community, their peers, and they don't get accepted. And they automatically become shunned and ostracized and even abused by their own loved ones who they thought they could come forward to. And so this abuse becomes a normal, regular thing. So when they get into these abusive and violent relationships, they don't realize that this is not how they deserve to be treated, and this is not actually normal. So it becomes even harder to leave, especially when the abuse they're experiencing in this relationship is actually less than the abuse that they were experiencing at home prior.
And I think you probably see that a lot in all the populations that we're serving, but especially when you look at human trafficking, right? Like, that they might feel like they already had to run from home in order to just stay alive, to be safe, especially, they came out to their families, and their families then either kicked them out or treated them really badly, and then they end up in a human trafficking situation where they're being trafficked, but going home isn't necessarily the thing that's going to keep them safer.
Right. Or sometimes they're not even accepted or welcomed back into.
Right, they don't have a home to go back to.
Exactly.
Do you see an issue with all three, domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, where maybe they haven't yet even come out at home and they're afraid to report because reporting means, oh, now my family, now my coworkers, everybody's going to know that, I'm in the QT population, and I'm not ready to come out with that yet?
Definitely. That's definitely one of the major sort of barriers to overcome. Just sort of the identity politics in general is something to keep in mind for any survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking that is QT. And that's not even just with the family. If you're helping them with a variety of services, signing up for county benefits, anything like that, or even like if you're meeting them for a SART,
Sexual assault response
Yes.
team.
Thank you. Then it's just sort of always good to keep in mind who they want to be out to in that specific situation.
That's important.
And then also with that, when they are doing these reports and making these reports and coming forward, they want to know that they're being well received. So not only not knowing if this prospective place who helps with domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking can do so, but also how will they receive me as a part of the QT community. So for example, when I introduce myself, I like to introduce myself with my gendered pronouns. I will say, hello, my name's Taylor. I go by she, her, and hers. I will also respond to they, them, and theirs. And then that just kind of makes them a little more at ease, makes them feel a little more comfortable, and helps them understand that the people who they're working with are aware of the community and aware of the community's needs.
That's awesome. And for those of you who may be watching this at home right now and you recognize yourself in some of these things and you think, gosh, I've been going through this, I'm in this relationship and I just haven't told anybody, that I feel unsafe or I feel pressured into something I don't want to be in, or I don't know how to stop this situation. And whether it's because of the LGBTQ plus dynamics or any dynamics at all, please don't hesitate to call our crisis line at 800-575-5352. Even if you know of a friend or relative, somebody who you just have questions about how do these things fit in, please don't hesitate to call. Of course, we serve all people regardless of gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, race, so we serve everyone out there. If you're watching this and you feel like some of these domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking dynamics have happened in your life or with a friend or family member, please don't hesitate to call that crisis line number. And then, so a follow-up question on something that you guys were talking about earlier with the trans community. Do they specifically experience things that are maybe a little bit different than the rest of the QT community?
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
So one of the additional oppressions that they face that maybe other individuals who are part of the QT community don't face would be, as we were describing earlier, just alone the name change. So maybe the name on their birth certificate is not what they identify with anymore, and they've actually come up with a new pseudonym for themselves that they go by, and they haven't had the opportunity to either apply to get it legally changed. Maybe they don't know that they can legally change it, or maybe they're in the process of it. So when they come to a respective organization such as ours, and they have to fill out their sheet, and they don't know what name they're allowed to put or what they're not allowed to put, and that can even be triggering for them based on how their parental home has reacted to them saying, hey, I don't want to be called this anymore, I don't want to be called John anymore, I want to be called Jane. So depending on how that dynamic worked out, it might be re-triggering for them to even have to come up and say, hey, my name is legally John, however I go by Jane.
And then in the different types of abuse that sort of the trans community faces, it's definitely that component of isolation and outing again. Somebody may not want to, be outed as trans at that time. They may not be safe to, so the abuser can definitely hold that over their head, say that if you do this, I'm going to out you to your family or to your healthcare provider in that kind of situation. And then just sort of preventing trans people from having access to the things that they need to affirm that identity, whether it be keeping them from medical care, like hormones and surgery, which would be similar to preventing somebody in a sort of heterosexual or cisgender relationship from accessing their prescription for things like depression and anxiety. And it's just sort of keeping them from the things that they need to affirm themselves and to keep themselves healthy even. And then on top of that, the abuser can completely dismiss the trans person's identity, keep them from other gender affirming items such as clothing and makeup, or just even call them sick and crazy. And usually you see that in a relationship where somebody starts to transition rather than a relationship that somebody gets into having already started that process.
Either way, it sounds extremely difficult to even just go through that whole experience in a healthy relationship. But when you add that power and control dynamic, it sounds like it would be really, really a difficult time for a person. I'm really glad that we have staff like you guys who are out there who are really, really confirming and caring about the folks who we serve every day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then one last question. what about, so between like we've talked a lot about domestic violence, but we also serve survivors of sexual assault and human trafficking. How might those dynamics come into play with the QT population around, more specifically to sexual assault or human trafficking?
Well, one of the main things that we see with the sexual assault community is that our bisexual folks usually of a minority race are more often going to be sexual assaulted than anyone else, unfortunately. And one of the main reasons for this is this idea of corrective rape. So usually someone whose sexual identity is that of female, even if their gender identity is not the same, are often experiencing this corrective rape where, oh, well, you don't know what it's like, so how could you say you don't like it, or you've never experienced this, and then so they move forward with those types of actions, which actually would probably deter someone from even wanting to pursue that gender, instead of kind of making them desire them anymore. So that's one of the main things we're seeing when it comes to the sexual assault population. Is there anything else?
I think that pretty much covers up one of the main aspects of the sort of sexual assault differences in the community. There's definitely more to it, though.
Yeah, almost like we need a second show at some point, right? Like, we definitely have more things to talk about, and we'll try and get you guys together and we'll do a follow-up show, because this topic, I just know there are so many folks out there hearing this right now who know, I know somebody who's had this experience, or maybe you yourself, you're sitting there watching this and you know, I was once sexually assaulted. I didn't realize it was sexual assault because maybe it was even condoned by my family because of my gender expression, or because of the things that I was going through around my LGBTQ plus or QT that identity. And so if you're seeing this right now, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to call our crisis line. Again, that is 800-575-5352. You can go see us in our service offices in Auburn. That would be at 11985 Heritage Oaks Place, and it's in Suite 200. We're just above the VA clinic there. And in Roseville at 775 Sunrise in Suite 160. And we're sort of behind the old spaghetti factory on Sunrise. And you'd see these amazing folks there ready to talk to you and to help you out and give you the resources and the services really necessary in order to be safe and to live a life of your own self-determination and go forward and be you in a safe, healthy relationship. So I want to sum it up by thanking both of you so much, Taylor and Kyle, for being here today and being willing to have this courageous conversation with us and to bring all this information out to the folks here in Placer County watching us on ACTV Channel 20 or on YouTube. And so thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
And
thanks for watching.
And we look forward to that, like, part 2, right? Thank you.